Over the last couple of weeks, I've been using the Samsung Galaxy S9 as my main phone. Today I decided to talk about the specifications of the phone and review them to let people know if it is worth buying. This is the Galaxy S9 Plus specs video. Hello everybody, my name is Matt and this is Real World Review. What I'm going to do is go over the specs of the phone, and at the end I will score the phone based on my personal experiences as a user and cell phone repairman. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section or on Twitter at MattofRWR. Let's get started. To start, our first category is the outside hardware. Let's start with the display. The display is a 6.2-inch dual-edge Super AMOLED screen with a resolution of 1440 by 2960, totaling 529 pixels per inch. The maximum screen brightness is super bright at 1130 nits, which is extremely high for an AMOLED display. With this said, benchmarks show a brightness of about 673 nits, which is still pretty high. There is Corning Gorilla Glass 5 covering the curved AMOLED display, making the front scratch resistant. The screen-to-body ratio is about 84% and has extremely thin bezels. Let's talk about the rest of the front. We start at the top where the earpiece and the sensors are. There is the speaker grill that covers the earpiece, and to the right is an 8-megapixel front camera along with the iris scanner. Something to note is that the earpiece doubles as a loudspeaker. To the left is the proximity and ambient light sensors along with the infrared emitter. Oddly enough, this phone lacks a front-facing microphone. On the bottom portion there is just a black bar. That's it. Moving on to the frame. On the bottom is a USB-C 3.1 port, a microphone, an open oval for the loudspeaker. Oh yeah, there's a headset jack too. On the right side there is a small power button. On the left side there are volume buttons and a Bixby button. And on the top there is a single hole for the microphone and a tray that holds the SIM card and memory card. On the back of the device are two 12-megapixel cameras that are slightly protruding out of the back. Below that is a fingerprint sensor. To the right of all that is a single LED flash unit and a heart rate monitor. Under all of this is a slightly curved piece of glass. As for the size, the device is 158.1 millimeters tall, 73.8 millimeters wide, and 8.5 millimeters thick, or 6.22 inches tall, 2.91 inches wide, and 0.33 inches thick. As for the weight, the S9 Plus is 189 grams or 6.67 ounces. The phone is water resistant but does not have a user removable battery or back. And now we move on to the cameras. There are two cameras on the back, one being a wide angle while the other is a telephoto camera. The cameras are both 12 megapixel sensors with a single LED flash and super speed dual pixel autofocus. The top camera has a dual aperture, which is f1.5 and f2.4, and the pixel size is 1.4 micrometers. The bottom camera has an aperture of f2.4 and the pixel size is exactly 1 micrometer. This phone supports different camera features like dual optical image stabilization, dual capture, 2x optical zoom, and high dynamic range. The rear camera can record video in some amazing ways. You can record 4K at 30 or 60 frames per second, 1440 at 30 frames per second, 1080p at 30 or 60 frames per second, 720p at 30 frames per second, and slow motion video can be captured at 1080p at 240 frames per second or 720 at 960 frames per second. Oddly enough, this phone supports 1:1 capture of 1440p at 30 frames per second and 18.5 by 9 at 1080p. I wouldn't use either of those, but if you're into that, this would be perfect for you. The front camera is an 8-megapixel sensor with the f1.7 aperture. It allows for a max of 1440p recording at 30 frames per second. There are quite a few different formats to record in. The next category is the inside hardware. As usual, we start with the processor. The processor in this phone is a 64-bit Qualcomm Snapdragon 845 chip. It is a 10nm octa-core processor with 4 cores running at 2.8 GHz and the other 4 running at 1.7 GHz. Geekbench gives the phone a score of around 2,381 for the single core and 8,075 for the multi-core test. The GPU is a Adreno 630 that runs at an unknown clock speed at the time of this filming. However, it is safe to assume that it is around 650 to 750 MHz. When testing the GPU, Geekbench gives the phone a score of around 14,129. The phone has 6GB of LPDDR4 RAM, which is pretty awesome. The model I'm reviewing is the G965U, and it is T-Mobile based. The phone supports 1G, 2G, 3G, and 4G, assuming that the market you're in still supports those, along with LTE bands 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 12, 13, 14, 17, 18, 19, 20, 25, 26, 28, 29, 30, 66, and 71. As for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, the Wi-Fi chip is at 802.11a, b, g, n, AC MIMO, and the Bluetooth is version 5.0. This phone also supports NFC, GPS, and GLONASS. The battery is a 3500 mAh lithium-ion cell that is supposed to last all day. Samsung claims that the battery will give you up to 25 hours of talk time and up to 15 hours of internet usage. This phone does support Quick Charge 2.0, and there is also fast wireless charging support, assuming that you have both chargers. Oddly enough, Quick Charge 3.0 and 4.0 have been left out of this phone, even though Snapdragon 845 devices are supposed to support 4.0. The phone comes out of the box with Android 8.0 Oreo. Hopefully this phone will get updates for a couple years, just know that the carrier-based ones will get them last. The phone supports a bunch of different audio formats like FLAC, DSF, M4A, and WAV. As for video playback, the phone supports a bunch of different formats like MP4, AVI, and MKV. Now that we've gone over the specs of the phone, it is time to give this phone a score. Note that this phone comes with 64GB and can be purchased new for $840 to $930 depending on your carrier preference. You can find these phones with 128 or 256GB of memory, but it isn't that easy to purchase. It should also be noted that this phone is a couple weeks old and most people will want to buy this phone new, and the scoring does account for this. Let's start with the frame. The phone is made out of glass and metal. The front is mainly glass and the back is glass as well. Since the screen and the back are both curved, it makes them both easier to break. With this said, it makes the phone look stunning. Samsung has been making curved phones easier to hold in your hand, and this one is no different. The design is almost exactly the same as the S8 Plus, but that isn't a bad thing. The back camera setup is a little bit better than the S8 Plus, and the fingerprint scanner is now in an appropriate area. However, there are complaints that the sensor is too low. I can see where people are right, but at the same time, I got used to this in less than a week, so it just takes some getting used to. The metal frame seems to hold up well, but this phone feels very fragile. It is kind of weird that they still use a single LED flash, but it does work. Overall, I give the outside hardware an 8.5 out of 10. Next is the screen. I love AMOLED screens. That's something you should already know by now. I don't worry about screen burn-in or the screen being washed out in the sun because it doesn't really happen too much on this phone. The best way to prevent screen burn-in is by turning off the screen when you're not using it, which is what I do. The colors look stunning on this phone, and the always-on display is always a nice touch. As for the edge display, it is there, but I turn off the features all the time. The screen rolls the image off, which looks cool, but I never use the edges to be more productive. You either like it or you don't, and there's no problem with that. Well, except for the S9 and the S9 Plus come with curved screens, but anyways. The screen size is definitely something to get used to, but it's not that difficult if you're coming from the S8 Plus. The screen is almost exactly the same as the S8 Plus, so the screen gets a 9 out of 10. Next is the inside hardware. The Snapdragon 845 processor is the top of the line right now, and it definitely shows. This phone is definitely fast, and you can tell the performance boost when compared to the S8 Plus. The 3500 mAh battery is large, but the performance is decent. Sure, you can get through a day, but it sucks knowing that this phone can't get you through 2 days with almost twice the battery capacity of an iPhone 8, which can get you through 2 days. I was just using the Moto Z2 Force, which has a smaller battery and last year's processor, and it gave me better battery life than this S9 Plus. The speaker is awesome because now there are two. The earpiece doubles as a speaker, while the bottom one makes the phone have stereo speakers. This is a nice touch, but they don't always operate at the same time like the iPhone 7 does. It is a work in progress for sure, and hopefully it can be fixed with some software updates. As for memory, 64GB is decent, but the addition of the SD card slot is awesome. I'm surprised that this phone doesn't really get that warm unless you're doing a lot of stuff on your phone. It is almost refreshing. Even when you charge the phone, it doesn't get as hot as phones like the S8 Plus or the S7 Edge. I'm still surprised that the phone does not support Quick Charge 3.0 or 4.0. Samsung, can you tell me what's up with that? Send me a DM. Thanks. Overall, I will give this phone an 8.75 out of 10 for the inside hardware. Next is the camera. As always on Samsung phones, the back camera is absolutely amazing, and this year they added another camera to the phone. 12 megapixels is standard nowadays, but now there are two cameras on the back. One with a wide-angle sensor and the other with a telephoto sensor. This allows you to do a bunch of stuff, but it's alright. I'm not too impressed with live focus mode, which is what they call the portrait mode. With this said, I still feel like companies need to work on this feature. Oh yeah, I almost forgot about this huge feature. One of the cameras has dual apertures. Long story short, this means that you can take low light pictures and they will look even better on this phone when needed. It's almost like having 3 cameras on the back if you really think about it. If you go into Pro mode, you can change it manually, but if you go into Auto, it does it automatically. Surprising, right? Another major thing is the recording modes. Not only does it support 4K at 60 frames per second, but it also supports super slow-mo at 720p at 960 frames per second. The latter is a little bit gimmicky, but if you know what you're doing, it could look awesome. The feature is still a work in progress overall. The front camera is a nice focusable 8 megapixel sensor. In fact, it's actually the same one that the S8 and the S8 Plus had. Interesting. Just like other Samsung phones, images can look warm. At least the dual aperture helps with night photos. With this said, during the day, the images look perfect as you would expect. I still believe that the camera gets a 9 out of 10. I actually find the single LED flash kind of funny. Next is the software. The phone comes with Android Oreo 8.0 for now. The software is nice and has a bunch of features, but Samsung always figures out a way to make TouchWiz annoy me. Like the Samsung S8, however, Samsung let off on the major customization. Some people love TouchWiz, and I'm not one of them. Look at those emojis. Horrible. And now we have animojis. AR emojis. It's just all weird. I'm definitely not a fan of it. There are, however, some things that I do love that Samsung put in here, like the always on display. I just wish there was a way to get stock Android on this phone. Another new feature is Intelligent Scan, which uses the front camera and the iris scanner to identify you and unlock the phone. Personally, it was slow, so I disabled it, and I stick with the fingerprint scanner and the face detection. It's crazy fast, so helps. The software never gets put into the scoring, but I will still give it a decent 8 out of 10. The last score is the future-proofing score. Since this phone came out recently, I'm not sure what major issues will be, but if any come out, I will definitely make a video about that. I've given up on Samsung adding the IR blaster back into the phone, but they did give us some stuff that will actually be pretty useful. The USB-C port on the bottom is USB 3.0, which doesn't mean much today, but in the future it will be beneficial. The Snapdragon 845 processor just came out and is crazy fast, so this is awesome for people planning on keeping this phone for the next 2 or 3 years. The battery is concerning since the battery life isn't that awesome already, and it will only get worse as time goes on. Overall, I will say this phone is future-proof and gets a 7 out of 10. Add up the scores and the phone gets a 42.25 out of 50, or 84.5%. The phone scored a little higher than the iPhone X, and that isn't an accident. These are both awesome phones, but Samsung knew what they were doing by changing the camera for the better. However, with this phone being so similar to the S8 Plus, I'm very curious to what they'll do next year. And that's it. Let me know what else you want me to review in the comment section below or on Twitter at MattofRWR. And I have a question for you. Is this the Galaxy to skip or to buy? Let me know, and feel free to follow me on the social media listed above. Thanks for watching.